Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Recognizing the Armenian Genocide event hosted by the John Brademas Center at New York University. This event was organized in honor of the Armenian Genocide Memorial Day, which is held every year on April 24th. As of yesterday, it has officially been 107 years since the atrocities of the Armenian Genocide took place. On April 24th, 1915, Armenian intellectuals and leaders were arrested and executed, which marked the beginning of the Armenian Genocide. Over 1.5 million Armenians were killed by the Ottoman Turks, including elderly, women, and children. But yet, the Armenian genocide maintains unrecognized. So this event will discuss and thoroughly look into the issue of the recognition of the Armenian genocide. A little bit about me. I'm Vazgen Gasparyan. I'll be moderating this event. I'm from Armenia and I studied at NYU Shanghai. I studied political economy. Currently, I'm interning at the John Brademas Center of New York University, and I have the honor to introduce to you our speakers of today. So please welcome Dr. Paul Boghossian, the Silver Professor of Philosophy at NYU's Philosophy Department and Distinguished Research Professor at the University of Birmingham in the UK. Our second speaker, Dr. Artyom Tonoyan, who is the editor of the Garden Aflame, the Nagorno-Karabakh Conflict in the Soviet and Russian press, and a former research associate of the University of Minnesota's Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies. Our third speaker, Dr. Leah Whitson, the Executive Director of Dawn, Democracy for the Arab World. Thank you to our speakers for dedicating time and effort to come to this event and educate us on the issue of the recognition of the Armenian genocide. First off, we will hear our speakers introduce themselves and share their expertise regarding the recognition of the Armenian genocide. After, we'll be open to receive any questions from the audience, and we'll start the discussion portion of the event. Now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Boghossian. Please feel free to take over whenever you're ready, Dr. Boghossian. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Vazgen and Polly and the Brademas Center for organizing this event. It's very important to have events like this because in addition to commemorating a huge tragedy in the history of mankind, as you were just now pointing out, the Armenian genocide is still something that few people know much about, even after 107 years. And part of the reason for this lack of knowledge is that the government that is the direct descendant of the government that perpetrated the genocide still denies that it happened, and indeed engages in a massive campaign to prevent people from finding out the truth about it. Former President Obama recently remarked that a campaign of disinformation can be effective even if it doesn't persuade people to believe the proposition that's being peddled. All it has to do is flood the public square with enough raw sewage, as he put it, for people to no longer know what to believe. And I have to say, I think the government of Turkey has done a very good job of that, confusing people with a lot of misinformation and nonsense. Well, why is it important that the government of Turkey be held accountable? The obvious reason, of course, is that justice demands it. But there are other reasons as well. Much as the Armenian nation has tried, it hasn't really succeeded in moving beyond the genocide because this is still an open wound in the nation's psyche. And victims of this kind of trauma, it's well known, need to have their suffering recognized if they're ever to achieve closure and be able to move beyond. But not only is this important for the victims, it's also extremely important for the perpetrators, because until the Republic of Turkey comes to grips with the enormity of the crime that lies at the foundation of its creation, it can never be a healthy nation and certainly not a healthy democracy. As the Washington Post slogan says, democracy dies in darkness. But perhaps the worst aspect of the lack of accountability can be seen in the recent war between Armenia and Azerbaijan, in which Azerbaijan, with massive help from Turkey, defeated Armenian forces defending the autonomous and wholly Armenian populated region of Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, imagine, if you will, Germany collaborating with the enemies of Israel to attack and seek to eliminate it. Is it possible to imagine such a thing? Of course not, because Germany has been held to account and virtually everyone on the globe knows what Germany did to the Jews during World War II. But of course, nothing like that has taken place in the case of Turkey. So Turkey can, with absolute impunity, help in the attack on Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh and indeed on Armenia itself, without in any way worrying about the repercussions of doing so. So that's, as people like to say, part of the reason for recognizing genocide and holding the perpetrators accountable is that it won't happen again. And that's absolutely correct, as we can see from the fact that it is happening again because Turkey has not been held accountable. Now, the campaign to recognize the Armenian genocide, recognition being the focus of this event, has focused very heavily on the word genocide. Until President Biden used that word in his statement on April 24th, 2021, Armenians were not satisfied that their suffering and loss had been adequately recognized by the US government. So an interesting question is, are they right to insist on that word? Why is it so important that it's that word? Because many previous presidents had used lots and lots of words: crimes against humanity, great tragedy, the forced deportation and mass murder of Armenians. But until the G word had been used, people felt that their suffering and had not been adequately recognized. So the question is, are they right to insist on the use of that word? And I think the answer is yes, but that doesn't mean that the word is not the source of a great deal of confusion. I will talk a little bit about that just to have these issues out on the table before us. The source of the confusion is that there really are two concepts of genocide that are in circulation. One is the legal concept defined in the UN Convention on the Punishment and Prevention of the Crime of Genocide, the technical legal concept. The other is a much more informal notion that most ordinary people have, I believe, in their heads. And the trouble is that these two notions don't really line up. What most people don't realize is that the technical legal concept is actually quite weak. It's very easy to satisfy the technical requirements on an event counting as genocide if you simply look at the definition of that concept as it is formulated in the Convention on Genocide, the UN Convention. On that technical notion, people will be surprised to hear you can have a genocide without even having a single death, because among the acts that the definition requires is not just killing, but harming, preventing births within a certain group, and so on. So technically speaking, you can have a genocide without even having a single death. Also, according to that definition, there need not be an intention to totally eliminate a particular group, since the definition only says that there should be an intention to eliminate it either in whole or in part, without saying what part means. And of course, that leaves it open that that part can be quite small. So in this way, then, the technical notion is actually a completely inadequate way of capturing the enormity of what happened to the Armenians. Because of course, the facts are that over 1 million, maybe 1.5 million Armenians were killed and dispossessed and tortured and had their civilization erased. So, if you're trying to capture all of that, it's not very well done by using this technical notion. On the informal notion, I think that people really have in mind when they talk about genocide, that genocide at a minimum involves the mass murder of the members of a group. along with an intention to eliminate that group from the face of the earth just because it is that very group. It also comes with the connotation that there can be no worse crime against humanity than genocide, which is why it came to matter so much whether that word was used or not, because it signals, when people use it, that we're talking about the worst of the worst that can happen to mankind. Now, interestingly enough, that's the intent that people have when they insist on the use of the word genocide. But as I say, if you look at the legal notion, it doesn't actually have those features. So because these two notions place such different demands, you can see how confusion can arise about whether the word applies in any given case. So for example, these days, there is a bit of a raging debate about whether what's happening in Ukraine is genocide. Now, if you're using the legal notion, there is no doubt that it's genocide, but that's only because that notion is quite weak, and many events would qualify under it. For example, I believe 9/11 would qualify as genocide under the technical notion. On the other hand, if you're using the informal notion, for which the paradigm would be the Nazi extermination of the Jews or the Armenian genocide, then you might hesitate to compare what's happening in Ukraine to those events. Horrific as the events in Ukraine actually are, they seem to be, as of now, on a totally different scale. So these are just some of the initial observations with which I thought I would open the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Boghossian, for your honorary remarks. Now I'd like to hand it over to Dr. Tonoyan. Please feel free to take over.
I would like to thank Vazgen and Polly and the Brademas Center for organizing this event on this solemn occasion. And it wouldn't be, I'm sure all of us here, one way or another, have some connection to the Armenian genocide through our families, through our ancestors, and so on and so forth. So, and yesterday being that 107th anniversary, it is extremely important that this discussion is taking place, this conversation is taking place. So without further ado, I have some prepared remarks, and my expertise is the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. And so I will try to make some connections between the Armenian genocide, the genocide recognition, and its effect on the conflict, on the trajectory of the conflict, where it's going, and so on and so forth. So when we speak about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, most of the analysis that has been done has been either historic or from the political science angle. And in a lot of these discussions, there has been a lot of focus on the Soviet context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, because for all practical purposes, the conflict broke out at the waning years of the Soviet Union. Some say it accelerated the process. Some say it even started the process of the collapse of the Soviet Union. But when we talk about the historical context of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, or even the political and social and cultural aspects of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, there is one thing that is curiously absent from the analytical framework, and that one thing is the Armenian genocide, and the memory of the Armenian genocide in the collective history of the Armenian people, in the Armenian Soviet Socialistic Republic, and so what I'm going to do is that I would like to look at how, when the conflict first started out, how the Armenian public was perceiving the issue of the genocide and what connection existed, and whether these connections were tenuous or not. So when we speak about the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan over the region's status, essentially the conflict over Nagorno-Karabakh is over the status of the region, whether the Armenians of the region should govern themselves and be an independent state, or whether they should be part of Armenia, or whether they should be assumed under Azerbaijan's jurisdiction. So, these issues aren't aren't dealt in a way that we expect them to be dealt with. So true, it was not Azerbaijan or Azerbaijanis that organized the Armenian genocide. It was the Ottoman Empire, a different country, a different period. But because there is such strong linguistic and ethno-religious connections between Azerbaijanis of today and Azerbaijanis of yesterday and the Ottoman Turks, nevertheless, this connection needs to be investigated and interrogated, and so on and so forth. So how do we go about doing this, and what questions come about? What are the connections? How are they connected? To what degree? Why does it matter? And in the final analysis, what does one make of it? And so, far from being tangential to the conflict in Nagorno-Karabakh, the issue of the Armenian genocide is really in the thick of it. And so I will try to offer some explanation, offer some untangling and unthickening of the issue. And there are 3 or 4 issues that make me think about the connections. One is from my own very personal experiences growing up in 1980s in Soviet Armenia and being rather politicized at a very tender age of 13, 14 years old. I remember when the first protests were breaking out in Soviet Armenia, I was this student activist in the middle school, transitioning to high school age, when everything all of a sudden acquires this sense of urgency about life and decisions, and people around you, the grown-ups around you, are all of a sudden, these passionate nationalists, and the school curriculum is undergoing tremendous changes, and so on and so forth. So when I first started going to these mass demonstrations in Gyumri, where I grew up, Armenia's 2nd largest city, and then in Yerevan, in the capital city, a lot of the popular, posters, the slogans, and the speeches that were being delivered by the speakers from the podium and during the mass demonstrations, a lot of it was cast in a light that what is happening to the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh, their plight, is really connected to what had happened to Armenians' ancestors in the Ottoman Empire. There's a magnificent book by a friend of mine, Artyom Tonoyan, who is the director of the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan. He has a fantastic book, really a masterpiece of a work that I highly suggest. It's called The Iconography of Armenian Identity, where Marutyan goes around and collected photographs from these heady days of the 1980s of Armenian nationalist movements. And a lot of these iconography that he calls, a lot of the posters, a lot of the photos make references to the Armenian genocide of 1915. It was looming large in the popular mind. It was looming large in the popular discourse. It was looming large in the popular culture. So that's one way that the Armenian genocide and the memory of it was connected to the Nagorno-Karabakh movement. And let's not forget that a lot of the Armenian genocide survivors that had found refuge in the Russian Empire through the orphanage, American-run orphanage in Alexandropol, or now Gyumri, a lot of the descendants of the Armenian genocide and their immediate families, they were still alive. A lot of the people that had undergone the genocide, they were still around, and they were drawing parallels through the family lore or through the interaction with their neighbors and relatives. And they were saying what was happening to the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh was very similar to what had happened to the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire. But we also need to talk about the political aspects of the Armenian government and the Turkish government trying to sort of compartmentalize the issue of the Armenian genocide and the issue of Nagorno-Karabakh. So when Armenia first became independent in the thick of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict in 1991, Armenia sought to establish diplomatic relations with Turkey. Turkey also sort of reciprocated. The borders were opened for a couple of years. There were transport links open, buses of Armenians going and and shopping and bringing goods from Turkey. All of this was happening, and the Armenian government sought to sort of manage Turkey and Azerbaijan on two different plates, as it were, on two different planes. Armenian government under under Levon Ter-Petrosyan, then under Robert Kocharian, then under Serge Sargsyan. They always sought to separate the issue of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, however connected it may have been to the Armenian genocide, in order to pursue a very pragmatic political opening with Turkey. Of course, a lot of this was predicated on wishful thinking on the part of the Armenian government, because as much as they sought to sort of keep Turkey at bay and neutralize Turkey's involvement in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, the Turkish involvement became rather inevitable over the years as Armenia started acquiring advantage on the battlefield in Nagorno-Karabakh, right? And a Turkish position, which in early 1990s was rather neutral. I mean, they were speaking about cultural ties and religious ties and historic ties with Azerbaijan. Nevertheless, Turkey was much more predictable than it is now on the international stage. And they also tried in their own way to pursue pragmatic sort of relations with Armenia. But they pursued this for their own purposes, right? They were pursuing it for a couple of reasons. One of them was to have Armenia, sort of independent Armenia, to put pressure on the diaspora to stop pursuing the goal of the genocide recognition, and also try to sort of put pressure on Armenia to normalize relations with Armenia, because Turkey was pursuing European integration, wanted to become part of the European Union. So they were trying to manage Armenia on their own terms in order to be able to pursue these political objectives and foreign policy objectives that they had. But this, I mean, in the beginning, more or less, these issues were working themselves out. But as Armenia began, Armenia was gaining on the ground in Nagorno-Karabakh, the position of Turkey gradually, then all of a sudden changed when Turkey began, especially after the Armenian takeover in Shushi in 1992 and the Kelbajar district in 1993, when Turkey finally and irrevocably cut its ties with Armenia and imposed economic sanctions and an economic blockade upon Armenia, and started sending military advisors and facilitated arms transfers to Azerbaijan and some mercenary elements from private security firms in the West, and inserted itself in the conflict in a sense. So those are some of the connections there. I don't know how much time do I have. I can.
We don't have much time already.
Okay.
Yeah.
Then maybe we can talk about.
The discussion portion will definitely be great.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Dr. Tonoyan, and I do want to remind that we will get to discuss these remarks made by the speakers during our discussion Q&A portion of the event. And now I'll be handing it over to our last speaker, Dr. Sarah Leah Whitson. The stage is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Vazgen. And I should just say, I am not a doctor in the way that my co-panelists are doctors. I'm merely a lawyer and an activist, and my experience and perspective on these issues is very much driven by my personal background and my work and experience as a human rights activist. you had asked me to reflect on the significance of recognition of the Armenian genocide. And I think more commonly now, we call that today being seen. And I thought that those words really resonated in terms of why Armenian communities around the world have invested so much time, so much effort, so many resources to persuade other people to recognize the wrong done to our people. I mean, what difference does it make to our grandparents whose bones are settled in the banks of the Euphrates or calcified in mass graves in Bezor? But we still raise our children with the memory not just of the wrong done to our people, but the wrong that continues with each year that the Turkish government denies it ever happened. I started to wonder, and I would imagine that this is a rich academic thread to be explored. Each year we learn more and more about the science behind generational trauma. The epigenetics of trauma, if you will. And I imagine that for Armenians, I know certainly for myself, whose grandfather was orphaned in the genocide, whose family became refugees in multiple generations, multiple rounds of a refugee experience, an itinerant experience of bouncing from one country to another, trying to find a new home. That we and our children really do understand what generational trauma means because we continue to live it. And we have a really deep ingrained sense of injustice. And I think very interestingly, an almost unexplained, unexplainable collective drive to resist the erasure that genocide intended. It's as if we are in this collective struggle to resist erasure that was attempted 107 years ago, but we still feel today and we fear today. I think the need for recognition by the international community is a quest for at least a fraction of accountability, affirming the truth of what happened. We need that affirmation. We want that affirmation and recognition. And 107 years later, I see that our community's quest has not gotten weaker, it's gotten stronger. In fact, it's gotten more successful if we consider President Biden's recognition at last of the Armenian genocide, what so many presidents before him, Republican and Democrat, failed to do. And I really do believe that it is fueled. Our quest, our strong quest, is fueled by Turkey's own stubborn refusal to come to terms with its past. It's just as more they dig in their heels to deny, the more we dig in our heels to insist that this recognition take place. And again, I think this will be a very rich thread for academics to explore and understand when thinking about issues such as peace and reconciliation. How do you bring about peace and reconciliation when we know 107 years later that's just really not possible until we grapple with what happened? I'd like to think that the Armenian people's dedication to accountability against the political odds favor acquiescing to the power, wealth, and influence of the Turkish government is an important contribution that our people are making to the very noble mission of global justice and what comes with it, the preservation of our humanity. I really see the effort of Armenians to seek recognition of the genocide, to commemorate the genocide every year as a contribution that we are making to our global humanity. After the Holocaust, the world joined together to bring some of the perpetrators to justice, to honor the dead, to compensate the victims, and of course, to vow never again, a vow that sadly has been broken over and over, but it was a critical moment for the world in establishing a shared modicum of a universal language of rights and wrongs, of truth and justice, not just words on paper, such as the word that was created of genocide, but the execution of justice. There has been no similar reckoning in the case of the Armenian genocide, and it's a reckoning that I think still today would help strengthen the rule of law worldwide and provide us some consolation and maybe even closure. I think that coming to terms with the past is no less a favor for the people of Turkey, because they are stuck with a government whose denials give them no space to learn about or resolve all that transpired at the hands of their own forebears, and keeps them locked into what must be a very perplexing sense of global scorn. 7 years ago, and it's shocking that to me that it was 7 years ago, but in 2015, we organized a group of Armenians from around the world to travel to Istanbul to commemorate the centennial of the Armenian genocide, joining Armenians, Turks, Kurds in Turkey, who had already started gathering annually for the past several years in Taksim Square in central Istanbul to commemorate this horrible crime. I think this is when I first got to know Professor Paul from NYU. We partnered with leading human rights and civil society groups in Turkey and organized several days of events, including a conference presenting papers about new research on the Armenian genocide at Boğaziçi University, a public university, I should note. I recall one paper in particular by Umit Kurt, I believe, who I think now is at UCLA, who presented on how the Turkish government was able to transfer Armenian properties to the state or to incoming settlers, declaring them absentee properties. And it struck me how Israel's playbook in Palestine has been so similar, having driven Palestinians to their exile over the past 60 years, but most massively in 1948. It was using and continues to use these bogus absentee laws that apparently premiered 107 years ago with the Armenian genocide to steal Palestinian lands. We often cite the systematic extermination of Jews as being the most bureaucratic and organized, but it turns out there was nothing new there either. The Turks were just as efficient in using lawfare to strip Armenians of their property as the Germans did during the Holocaust, and now Israelis are continuing to do in Palestine. We also partnered with Osman Kavala, a great Turkish philanthropist who founded a cultural foundation called Anadolu Kultur. He has dedicated his life to fostering appreciation for diversity and inclusion in Turkey, restoring the country's ancient heritage and historic sites, including so many crumbling Armenian churches, preserving Kurdish language and music, supporting Syrian refugee communities. He spearheaded a massive 4-hour-long concert at the Istanbul Concert Hall with thousands of attendees, commemorating in particular the Armenian intellectuals, artists, and musicians who had been rounded up in Istanbul on that fateful day of April 24, 107 years ago. We heard music and poetry from artists who had flown from around the world alongside Turkish artists to perform at this amazing concert. These events in 2015 heralded a breakthrough in Turkish civil society and a moment of openness and tolerance by the Turkish government. Sadly, it did not last. It has not lasted. When the HDP, Turkey's progressive secular party associated with the Kurdish minority in particular, won over 12% of the election in June 2015, Erdogan launched a massive crackdown in the country against this political party who threatened his rule, arresting thousands of civil servants and civil society members. When Erdogan suffered an actual coup attempt in July 2016, almost exactly a year later, he used that opportunity to quash out all of civil society that pestered him, including Osman Kavala's cultural work, arresting Osman and several others in October 2017, preposterously claiming that he was an agent of Soros who plotted the coup. Today, a Turkish court has sentenced Osman, my dear, dear friend Osman, to life in prison, and his associates, many of whom are also my friends, to 18 years in prison. Every human rights organization, every Western government leader and parliamentarian has condemned this bogus trial and I am personally crushed. This is deeply, deeply personal for me. One would have hoped, I certainly did, that 2015 would have been a glimmer of light, shining us toward a new path forward. I am not hopeful that the normalization discussions between Armenia and Turkey right now are sincere or aim to bring genuine peace and understanding. I do remain firmly convinced, however, that our remembrance and justice for the victims of the Armenian genocide remains firmly intertwined with the need for Turkey to share in our remembrance and for all of us to stand with the victims of abuses, whether our grandparents 100 years ago or Osman Kavala and so many other Turkish civil society leaders crushed under the oppression of their government today. This month, a bipartisan group of legislators here in America proposed the Armenian Genocide Education Act, which would provide $10 million over 5 years for the Library of Congress to educate Americans about Ottoman Turkey's systematic and deliberate state-sponsored mass murder, national dispossession, cultural erasure and exile of millions of Armenians, also Greeks, Assyrians, Chaldeans, Syriacs, Aramaeans, Maronites, and other Christians between 1915 and 1923. This is far away from Turkey, sadly, but remains now an essential component of keeping the memory and all that we stand to learn from our past, all that will help us heal our wounds alive today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitson. And thank you to all of our speakers for your honorary remarks. And now we can start our discussion portion while keeping in mind our speakers' presentations. So please feel free to send any questions in the chat box, and I'll be presenting it to the speakers from your behalf. And we have already received several questions. So there's an open question, so any of the speakers can respond to it. And one of the audience members has asked, given the Ukraine situation, we have seen how Russia's recognition of Luhansk and Donetsk enabled Russia to invoke UN Charter Article 51 to conduct a completely legal special military action. What would have been the result of the 2020 Artsakh War had Artsakh been recognized by Armenia and possible other countries as either an independent autonomous republic, exclave of sovereign Armenia?
Artyom, Dr. Tonoyan, maybe.
Sure. I'll take a stab. When the war first broke out, long before the war, Armenia had always dangled the card of the possibility of recognizing Nagorno-Karabakh as an independent, which then would allow Armenia to sort of enter into a treaty obligation with Nagorno-Karabakh, formalize the relationship between the countries, and in time of need, Armenia would offer its military and political succor to Nagorno-Karabakh. Well, the political and military support that came from Armenia did not actually need such formalizing of relations. And I'm honestly, I'm of the opinion that Armenia's invocation of some sort of a formal recognition would do anything to make matters better. Whether Armenia recognized Nagorno-Karabakh or not, the deck was stacked in such a way that the odds were not in Armenia's favor, regardless. Would Armenia be able to, even in these circumstances, would Armenia be able to attack Azerbaijan from within its territory? Well, there is evidence that Armenia actually did launch some rockets. I think Armenia's recognition of Nagorno-Karabakh would be more of a counterfactual than not helpful. So I don't think the way the Armenian military and the political culture was structured, that it was going to do anything that was that was done beyond anything that was done by the Armenian government. Armenian military was behind Azerbaijan. Armenians had no political or military support whatsoever from Armenia's traditional ally in a way that Armenia was expecting. So in a practical sense, I don't think it would make a hell lot of a difference whether Armenia had recognized or not.
Thank you, Dr. Tonoyan. The question that I would like to ask is, considering the US recognition, what would you say that we should or we could expect in the upcoming decade or so from other hegemonic powers in the world, such as the UK? And considering the normalization talks, as also mentioned by Dr. Whitson, the normalization talks being carried out right now by the Armenian government, what should we expect from Turkey then? Do you think this is going to enable Turkey to carry on its denial, or the opposite is also an open question to any of the speakers that if you would like to take over?
I'm going to defer to Paul and Artyom because I am not nearly as an expert as they are in terms of the current political negotiations and discussion between Turkey and Armenia.
Well, I think it's terrible to be entering into these discussions from a position of great weakness. It's lost whatever leverage there was by decisively losing this war. Clearly very inadequately prepared for something that was clearly going to happen. I guess with this kind of traditional Armenian reliance on Russia, the great protector, without realizing that the dynamics had changed, so that it was no longer in Russia's interest to block Azerbaijan's attack. So I fear nothing good can come out of these discussions when, in fact, there's been no recognition, there is no leverage, there is absolutely no reason for Turkey to make any interesting concessions to Armenia at this point. There were times, I think, in the last decade or so, especially around the centennial, when there were, Davutoglu was foreign minister. Davutoglu said a remarkable thing in the news conference. He said, the events of 1915 were a major crime against humanity, which is the most important concession that Turkey has ever made in this direction. But it wasn't properly taken advantage of. I think at this moment, I fear only bad consequences.
Yeah, adding on to it, I don't think Armenia's normalization of relations with Turkey is going to have any sort of positive outcome on Turkey's behavior and the internal dynamics of Turkish politics. For all practical purposes, Turkey remains, in a sense, prisoner to a very fascistic ideology. It is a very nationalist government whose sort of otherization of its minorities has become vicious. The way things are, unfolding in Turkey, in Turkish Kurdistan and in Iraqi Kurdistan, and the way the Turkish Foreign Ministry is conducting itself on the international stage. And I mean, it was only a couple of years ago when the Turkish ambassador's goons and Erdogan's goons attacked and bludgeoned Armenian and Kurdish protesters in Washington, D.C., in the heart of Washington, D.C. So taking into considerations all of this and the fact that Turkey is sort of imposing peace agenda on its own terms, where Armenia is not just a junior partner, but Armenia is sort of this small actor that is doing what it is being told to do. Right, Armenia tries to claim some agency in these relations, and it is high time that Armenia has some sort of relations with one of its most important neighbors in the neighborhood. But I don't think the way things are structured, the way things are being done, and just given the overall incompetence of the government in Yerevan, it's just a different weight categories altogether. It's like, Garry Kasparov boxing with, Mike Tyson. It's just, if Mike Tyson was a chess player and Kasparov was the chessboard, would be a different story. But they're just playing two different sports where Armenia is wholly and woefully unprepared. And it's not because it's Nikol Pashinyan and so on and so forth, as much as I dislike his administration. It is, Armenia's economic power, Armenia's political power is almost anemic. It has no room to wiggle. It has no room to maneuver. So it is, in a sense, doing what it can under the circumstances. And what this is going to do, I think, is just going to defer the recognition of the genocide within the Turkish society. We're just going to have to hope for better days where a more predictable Turkish government comes to power, a more democratic Turkish government comes to power, and the internal political dynamics change to such a degree that the Turkish government will then realize that, doing right by the Armenians is the right historic thing.
Thank you, Dr. Boghossian and Dr. Tonoyan. We have another question from a member of the audience, and they ask, what, if anything, can the US government do to promote peace and self-determination in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and justice for those wrongly persecuted in Turkey? And I'd also like to add on, what if any nations in the world, what could they do to promote peace and self-determination in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and to stimulate and supplement for the recognition of the Armenian genocide?
Dr. Whitson might be good at that now.
Could you just repeat that? There's a protest going on right outside the window where I'm actually going to be speaking as soon as I leave here, so I couldn't hear.
Yes, of course, of course. The question is, what if anything can the US government do to promote peace and self-determination in the Nagorno-Karabakh region and justice for those wrongly persecuted in Turkey? And I also like to add on, in general, what others could do in any nation to promote self-determination for the Nagorno-Karabakh region and justice and recognition for the Armenian genocide.
Well, I think it's problematic to frame this as what the United States can do to help promote self-determination for the people of Wrapup or peace and security for the people of Turkey, because that assumes that that's a priority for the US government, and it's not. The United States has been only too eager to cede this space to Russia and to rely on Russia to solve this problem. And I think that the Ukraine war is only going to redouble Russia's commitment to controlling its southern flank and ensuring that Armenia is a buffer between what it probably sees as a more threatening Muslim crescent from from the east all the way through the west and beyond North Africa. I think that in terms of peace and security, Russia is probably going to be a better bet for Armenia and the Republic of Armenia than the United States, which sadly has been a very, very unreliable ally and unreliable supporter. That's not to say that Russia is a good actor. We see the horrors of its crimes in Ukraine. But I think if we start with the premise that for countries like the United States and Russia, Armenia is really just primarily a political football and a geopolitical rook to play in a chessboard. I wish it weren't so. I would certainly insist that the international community, the United Nations and member states of the United Nations have a duty to ensure the self-determination of the people of Artsakh and Karabakh, as they do in many other territories, not least among them Palestinians, not least among them Western Saharans, not least among them Tibetans. You know, it's a long list. And while I support self-determination for all peoples of this world, my own personal priority right now is peace and security, no more lives lost. And I think we have to come to terms with the fact that we are not in a good negotiating position. Armenia is in a bad negotiating position. Armenia and Armenians lost the war. And there is no realistic scenario where Armenia's military might will successfully defeat Azerbaijan plus Turkey, as we all know, plus a number of Gulf states that were selling them weapons and providing them support as well. And I think we have to start with that recognition to then consider how we will best preserve the security, safety, peace of Armenians who wish to remain in Karabakh. Unfortunately, our numbers are very, very small. So for me personally, the preservation of life right now is paramount. And, you know, the future might be something different, but I think that I've been pretty surprised and disappointed, for example, about the attacks and condemnation of the Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan. I don't really see him as having many options. All that being said, I am not an expert on the conflict in Karabakh. I'm merely an observer.
Thank you so much for your response, Dr. Whitson.
If I may add something.
Of course.
If I may add something.
Of course.
I agree with Sarah that, yeah, I agree with Sarah that, you know, United States is not the end all, but there's something that can definitely done. It is not up to the United States to sort of be the arbiter of this, right? But it is up to the Armenians and in Nagorno-Karabakh and in Armenia proper and in the diaspora to convince the United States and the politicians in the United States that matter, the leadership, and in the Western countries, to be principled on these issues of human rights and security guarantees to the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh. I mean, we saw how the West sort of got united and is imposing cost on Russia, and rightly so, for its, you know, war on Ukraine, which was unnecessary, unnecessarily evil. And we see that these instruments are in place. These instruments can be used. This instrument could be utilized. This is not reinventing the proverbial wheel, right? So why not be as principled and as consistent in applying these instruments of coercion, economic, political, and so on and so forth, to change Azerbaijan's behavior, which, I mean, it's scandalous. I don't have to elaborate further. I mean, Azerbaijan's policy is, you know, from the get-go has been the ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh from the Armenians and destruction of the Armenian culture, and so on and so forth. So the instruments are there. It is up to the Armenians to sort of be able to convince themselves that they will be able to compel Western politicians to be principled on the applications of these instruments wherever human rights are violated, and in Nagorno-Karabakh and Azerbaijan as an instance of it, rather than courting Azerbaijan to release more gas and oil to take off the pressure from Russia's shutting down of the gas and the oil supplies and so on and so forth. So they're flirting with a dictator. So it's like there are dictators they like and there are dictators they don't like. And right now they don't like Putin, so the alliances with Putin are over. Now let's flirt and bed the dictator in Baku. So if there is some sort of consistency in this, I mean, it is what we can hope for, and it is what the Armenians should be, working towards.
I agree with a lot of what my colleague said, but just a couple of points of difference. One of them is, Sarah Leah said, well, this is not a priority of the United States, so we shouldn't really be asking this question. No, the answer is that the United States can do a huge amount, just as Artyom was now saying. It has enormous leverage, but the losing strategy is to try to get it to behave in a morally principled way. That is a losing strategy. That's not going to happen. Big powers like this do what's in their best interest. The winning strategy is to convince them that defending Armenia is in fact in their geopolitical interests. And what's going on in Ukraine is not a principled stand. It has many, many other practical aspects, some of which were made it into the headlines today, which is that the US aim is to weaken Russia. And that's a geopolitical calculation. It's not a principled calculation. So I think we need to stop. Armenia has to convince not just the United States, but the European Union that it is in their interests to defend Armenian sovereignty and independence and strength. And it has to stop relying on Russia to protect it from all comers, because the dynamic of that has changed completely. Russia is not motivated anymore, again, by the idea that this is another Orthodox Christian nation in the Islamic crescent, which it's supposed to defend. It's actually moved by very different considerations. And the sooner we get on top of that, the better off we'll be.
Thank you.
Totally agree there.
Thank you so much. And in the interest of time, we are going to have to wrap up. And I want to apologize to all of the audience members whose questions we didn't manage to get to. And I want to thank you, all the speakers, for attending and sharing with us your expertise. As an Armenian, this means a lot to me, because even the 80 people that have attended this webinar, it's 80 more people who are educated about the Armenian genocide and who will take action towards the recognition of the Armenian genocide and to advocate for the self-determination of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, which will definitely result in eternity of the Armenian nation and the preservation of another culture in the world. And now I would like to hand it over to Polly to do a quick wrap up. But thank you so much to our audience members and our speakers for attending.
Thank you, Vazgen.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. My name is Polly Terzian with the NYU John Brademas Center, and I echo every word that's been spoken, and especially Vazgen for you leading today's program. I'd like to thank our guest speakers, Artyom Tonoyan, Paul Boghossian, and Sarah Leah Whitson for their time and their insight in discussing the Armenian genocide this evening. And in particular, I'd like to give a special thanks and big shout out to Brademas Center intern and current NYU student Vazgen Gasparyan for leading and creating the event. The program recording will be uploaded to both the event webpage and to YouTube if you'd like to check it out later. And you can also subscribe to future Brademas Center events. I'm going to post that link in the chat for everyone to access. Thank you again so much. This is the conclusion of today's program, and I hope you have a wonderful remainder of your day, whether it's the end of the day or the beginning of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Polly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Polly, and thank you, Vazgen. And nice meeting you, Paul and Sarah Lee.
Yes, and Paul, I'm going to ping you. Let's get together.
Wonderful. Finally.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.